Thank you very much. I am honored to be with all of you. Um, I just can't tell you how wonderful ITAC 4 was for my husband and me um, to meet so many different people. So, what we have been doing for the last 8 years is a piece based on my father's World War II memoir, which he did not write until 1989. So over 40 years after the end of his war, as he called it. And I'm just making sure, I'm seeing a little telephone. Is that what I'm supposed to be seeing, Madeline?
Yes, that just means someone's joining us by phone and
Oh,
not
great.
videoing
Okay.
in.
I'm just wanted to make sure I hadn't, well, I'm not going to punch anything. Okay. So,
You're fine.
um, the thing we learned, first off, this is titled The Arts and Trauma, um, not necessarily combat trauma or war trauma. And one of the first things we discovered was that this story acts as a catalyst for healing, not just for combat veterans or families of veterans, but for people who have had many, many different kinds of trauma. And here's the thing. Um, I don't know, obviously, what people are doing everywhere, but most of what I've seen working with theater, especially, and music, um, have been programs where people are creating works out of their own traumatic experience with a teaching artist facilitating. And we discovered from the very first time we did the performance of My Father's War that because it was a very strong story, because it's set with music and narration, because my husband authentically produces my father's voice. Every word he says is directly from my father's memoir. We did not edit. We selected pieces from it to tell his whole story, um, so that the journey that my father goes through from being a young, energetic, hollow boy, a very naive young man in many ways, from the Appalachian Mountains in Western North Carolina. He hunted, he fished, but he also acted on stage. He was a painter and a writer and loved school. So you take this young man and put him into World War II, into training as a fighter pilot, flying a P-47 Thunderbolt, which was a huge airplane, but a single pilot plane. So he did everything from dogfights, the air-to-air combat, to bomber escort, to ground troop support. He did strafing. He killed people one-on-one. So you take him from being this lovely, naive, wonderful, only child from the mountains through the war. And then when he comes back out, he realizes that he has changed and that he is different. He has what we now call post-traumatic stress disorder. And he dealt with that for the rest of his life until he finally wrote his memoir in 1989. And in the family, we think that he finally wrote the memoir because he retired and he was very active in politics and in the Episcopal Church and very active in the community theater in Asheville, North Carolina. But once he retired, still, he had a lot of time to think. And it was about a year later that he finally sat down and wrote the memoir out, longhand on big legal pads with a jar of #2 pencils at the kitchen table. And he got up at 6 o'clock in the morning and wrote until supper time for 6 weeks. And then it was done. He also never edited it at all. He told his story. He told it in his mountain storytelling voice. He was a highly educated man, but also a really good mountain storyteller, traditional storyteller. And after he finished writing the memoir, he was better. Within weeks, he began to be more cordial. He was always a lovely man for the most part in public, but he became more available to people, to both his family and his friends. His nightmares, which he had had since World War II, so for over 40 years, began to lessen. His flares of temper lessened. And in general, he was a happier person. So we took the memoir. My older sister had it printed just at a Kinko's, at a copy place, very informally. And we sort of started passing it with his permission to other family members and then eventually to other veterans. He started going to the reunions of the World War II veterans, and especially of his squadron and his company. And it was a remarkable change in this man. And he lived for another almost 20 years. So we took the story. I grew up also with a habit of storytelling in the mountains, in the South in general, in the United States, but certainly in the mountains. And I understand from many of my British and Scots-Irish relatives and ancestors that when you are asked a question, you do not say yes or no. You tell the story of how it happened. So I grew up with the and always there were educators, but always there was music in my family. Instrumentalists, fiddlers, banjo, guitar, but vocalists and the a cappella ballads of the mountains and of the islands. So singing was as common as speaking in our house. And it wasn't until I went away to college that I found out that not everybody thought of it that way. So we have this story. We have songs from the World War II period. We have songs from the mountains, like The Minstrel Boy, which of course originally came from the British Isles. And we put them together into a piece that I'm very uncomfortable saying nice things about myself, but my husband and I, with my father's material, have created a piece that moves almost everyone we've ever done it for. And from the very beginning, when we were first doing the 30-minute versions with just a few things sort of strung together, we've had veterans who are 20 years old and veterans who were 90 years old start talking about their wars in the discussion immediately after the performance for the very first time. They had never spoken about it with their families. There would be a wife or a husband or children in the audience with them, and their families would be going, "What? You never told us, you never said anything." But hearing my father's story and seeing my husband enact that story and go through that terrific emotional, mental, spiritual journey on stage opened up the places that they had been keeping hidden, the places they had been keeping protected. And we very quickly realized that we needed to be working with counselors and with therapists if we were going to be working with veterans, because we are not. We are artists, which means maybe we have a lot of empathy and maybe some insight, but we are not trained to deal with other people's trauma. That being said, we've always had, as I said, the discussions after every performance. And veterans tell their stories. Family members of veterans, whether their veterans are there or not, will start talking. They say things like, I never understood why my father was that way, or my mother, or my uncle, or my aunt. You've given me insight into why. And then people who have nothing to do with the military will say things like, I had no idea that this is what we ask from the young people who serve. And I do believe, I think, that that is a human experience and perhaps cross-cultural. Again, I don't presume to know that, but it seems to me that might be so. So we started with the play, and it's simple storytelling. I don't know if I dare try it. I do have a picture here I can share. Let me see if I can do this. Share. So that's what you see. That's all that's up there. It's 2 music stands, 2 actors. We have our scripts. We do basically readers theater because we're old and because it's long, and the guitar, and that's it. How do I get out of share? Let's see, stop share. Wow. So that everything that happens, the story, people are creating it in their minds. We don't give them pictures. We don't give them films or any kind of scrim work behind us. It's just basic storytelling with music. I'm kind of rambling here. So let me stop and ask, does anybody have a comment or a question or need a clarification at this point? Jace? Anybody?
I think it's good that you don't present any pictures and you let the people, that's what makes it all the more powerful and effective, is that they're working through their own story, through the emotions that you're bringing out.
Thank you. I think we've been discovering this as we went, and that was the decision we made, partly because we are storytellers and we didn't have a lot of money. But then people started saying, well, why don't you do this or that, or we could add that, and we were like, no, I don't think so. So I'm glad that seems right to you as well. Because
yes,
people,
I've done a lot of storytelling as well, in an earlier chapter in my life, and actually I'm having to do a presentation in a couple of months, and I've just come to the decision. It was dithering, won't I do it? But yes, I am absolutely going to do it in the storytelling format.
Yeah.
Mostly because I can give so much, but other people will add their own layers and things to it as well.
Yes, and that their brains can do more than we could possibly give them. So good, wonderful. In terms of, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so I was wondering about something.
Yes.
I don't pretend to know about the United States. I don't live there, but TV from and movies from the US are quite common.
Mm-hmm.
And at least around 15 years ago, maybe 10, it seemed to be an issue that divided people from the US to be against or in favor of war.
Right.
So I was picturing that a piece like the one you work with your husband could also be problematic in that sense. I don't know, that it could generate that kind of divisions among the audience. I was just thinking about that.
That is a really, really good question. Early on, we realized that we could not take a side. All we do is tell the story. My father's story is, again, one of a young man who went into war through his training and then through his horrific experiences he was also shot down, among other things, besides killing a lot of people. We just tell his story. His story is that he was deeply changed by his experience. And when he came out, he had symptoms which he talked about, even though he did not recognize or name them as post-traumatic stress. That's simply his story. Some people have assumed that we are pro-war because we do tell it the way he wrote it. When he went into the war, he thought it was his duty. He was eager to go. He was happy to go. World War II was a little more clear-cut, sort of, if war ever is clear-cut. But so he's very, very enthusiastic at the beginning of his story. Then he goes through these traumas. There's also a very funny mouse who sort of terrorizes his tent, and they finally entice him out with chocolate and then decide not to kill him because he's such a ballsy little thing, you know. And then he comes out so deeply changed. We let people make their own decisions. We are very careful not to take a political stance, and we are very careful not to take a pro or against stance about war. That's not our job, we think. Our job is to tell the story and let the story work what it needs to for every person who sees it. Does that make sense? What do you think about that? What does anybody else think about that?
How do we, that was an issue I ran into this summer. My project this summer was an arts integration project with teenagers, and we were renovating a trolley car from Nagasaki, Japan. So the kids were renovating the trolley, but they were also creating a woodblock narration about a boy who was a tram driver on the morning of the atomic bomb. And his train was rerouted out of the area, so he survived and then participated in the reconstruction of Nagasaki. And what I subsequently found out is he's still alive. He's 93, so he's getting a set of our woodcuts. But our big concern, I was doing this with the Seashore Trolley Museum in Maine, and you know, we had to have a talk beforehand about whether this could raise a lot of political issues, because talking about atomic destruction is still uncomfortable in the US. But we have this relationship with Japan. We're the only country that used an atomic bomb, and they're the only country that experienced an atomic bomb. So we feel it's really important to discuss with children. These were middle school kids, ages 13, 14. It turned out to be 6 girls, not my expected demographic, but they were absolutely amazing. And we Skyped with 2 authors it was a week-long intensive. With Susan Southard, who was the author of Nagasaki, Life After Nuclear War. And she had originally written the story of this man that I found, so we did that. And then she Skyped over an hour with the kids about the book and about interviewing the survivors. And you know, it was hard to advertise a summer program about nuclear war. But you know, these kids really were thirsty for this kind of content. They absolutely loved the week, and they worked really hard. I mean, they, were completely focused for the whole week. And just recently, I read there's a very good essay in Time Magazine, of all places, by a woman named Kate McQuaid, who teaches at Phillips Andover Academy, on her class that she teaches on trauma literature, and how many people say that, oh, this is too dark, these subjects are too dark for adolescents to handle. But she thinks that's really a mistake, to underestimate what teenagers can handle or should.
Yes.
And I felt that we did, we had an amazing week with these kids, and we, for them, they said, it's meant something to us because it's not just statistics. When we study the wars in school, it's like how many people died, how big was the bomb,
Right.
what was the square footage. But they felt that they knew this person by the end of the week. And the fact that he survived meant that we could make the project more about resilience and survival and how people cope with trauma. And there's a lot of, like, his story was he was the least physically injured of the people that Susan interviewed, and she picked people to interview. There were 5 people that she interviewed, because she wanted a variety. She wanted, and this she shared with the kids, that she wanted someone who was severely injured, someone who had a lot of family, and there's like a heartbreaking story about a woman with what the war meant to her family. But it wasn't just about the bomb, it was also about the community afterwards, the reconstruction of the city. How do people recover? And the fact that there was really no help from either government for the survivors of the nuclear disaster, that they had to kind of figure it out themselves. So that was pretty shocking as well. But yeah, I think it's really important to sort of go to those places and done carefully. Unfortunately, we didn't have anybody coming up and saying, what about Pearl Harbor on the other side. And I think the fact that we were focusing on the city and survival and resilience maybe helped. But I don't know. It is touchy to talk about these places. And my 2 uncles were in the Pacific Theater. And I know what I was saying. It's interesting. At the same time that we were doing this project, the University of New England had an installation done by college students called No One Fights Alone, which was based on letters in their archives that people had written during World War II. And it was specifically about the Pacific Theater, which really isn't covered in school curriculums as much as the European War in our area. And what they did there was, and I was thinking about this in terms of your story sharing, they had a wall that had blank, sort of old-fashioned looking pieces of paper where people could write either their own experiences or the experiences as family members.
Oh, excellent.
It was really great and people would just post them on there with magnets or whatever. So, because my 2 uncles never talked about the war, but when they came home, they couldn't sleep in their beds. They had to sleep on the floor. And when one of my uncles was invited to go on a camping trip with a church group, afterwards he confessed to my mother that he just was full of anxiety. And she said, take your pocket knife. So you feel like you have but they went on and had families and had lives without any obvious problems with PTSD or things, who knows what, they were experiencing in terms of, they didn't have anything overt, but at the same time, I'm sure that they were teenagers when they went, and they were gone for 4 years. So, I feel it's too bad that we couldn't have talked to them more about it.
I think it's, there is now, as you say, people are beginning to talk about war, as you were saying, sir. We can't underestimate kids. We do this performance for high schools and for colleges, and they love it. They love to get involved with it. They love to begin to understand that kind of trauma. And again, they many of them have seen a great deal of trauma already in their lives, especially in some of the inner city schools and in some of the really rural schools. And hearing about my father's trauma and his response to it, the traumatic experience, again, allowed them to open up and talk about their own, even though it had nothing to do with war as such. So the arts, and again, a strong work of art will, we always know, we know this, all of us know this, will open things up for people in a way that nothing else can. Who else? Anybody else? Thank you very much.
Hi.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm Simon from Kenya.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I come very different culture, very different experience. I'd like to know which war are they fighting? Because when you talk about war, maybe when you talk about war in Kenya, we talk about tribal wars, one tribe fighting another tribe because of the land, because of the economical issues. And when you talk about the war in 80s and early 90s, you talk about Kenyan people fighting for the independent, fighting with maybe with the Europeans to get the independent. So maybe I'd like to a bit to understand which kind of the war your dad was fighting.
That's a really good question. He was, of course, fighting in World War II in the European theater. He was also fighting the war with himself. And toward the end of the play, his story, there's a place where he asks God for forgiveness for committing murder. We have discovered that from the United States, soldiers who have been anywhere in the world who have been in combat, listen to my father's story, and they always say at the end of it, in the discussion or in the workshops that we do, that's my story too. We have also had gang members say, that is my story, fighting their wars in the streets, in the cities. Any kind of, I think, conflict that is more than verbal, or maybe not. In any case, they stand in for each other. It's the same, it's enough of the same experience that this work of art reaches people who are fighting all kinds of wars in many different places. And some are just within their families, some are in their neighborhoods, and then some are overseas. Did that speak at all to what you were saying?
Yeah.
I think it's, oh, I forget, there's an English author, anyway, who said, it's all wars, dearie, in a novel. It's all wars, dearie. And this, again, because it's a strong work of art, it gets to that place for people who are hearing it, who are seeing it, no matter where that place comes from in them. And again, I think that's the strength of the arts.
I truly agree with you. We are all fighting our own wars. And I do music. I manage a program that deals with the music, orchestral music in the slums area of Nairobi. Yeah, and we deal with young children and youths, similar to El Sistema program.
I know El Sistema, yeah.
Yeah, so similar program, but it's called the Art of Music Foundation.
Lovely.
Yeah, so it's similar way. We use music in the slums area to rescue young gangs, children who are facing harsh environment, and we give them opportunities. So when they come to the music program, when they practice their piano, when they practice their instrument, saxophone, violin, they forget what they are facing outside, the wars that they are fighting outside. At that moment, they can concentrate with the music. And when they play with the rich kids here in Kenya, they forget that they forget what they face outside, and they fight their own wars through music.
Mhm.
And I think it's a good conversation we're having, because I can now relate the kind of the wars we are talking about. Yeah,
Say that one more time. I'm sorry.
I can now relate the war, because
Yes.
I believe everyone is fighting his or her own war every day.
I would agree with you.
Yeah.
And I think artists of all kinds, in a way, we're unlucky because we are very sensitive to that, perhaps. That's why we're artists. I don't know. Anyone else? A comment or a question?
Not really. I will listen to the rest of the story.
Well, there's a lot of it. Another chapter that my husband and I went through this the first part of 2019. We spent 5 months with, it turned out, just 3 people who were in their 30s and 40s. They were all combat veterans. Well, I take it back. 2 were combat veterans and 1 was a medic. So he went out and retrieved all the people who were the victims of combat and brought them back and had to treat them. These were 3 people who were already in treatment for PTSD. They were working with therapists at the Veterans Recovery Center. We did the show there and had quite a few people, but these 3 chose to stay with us for a series of writing workshops. And we then had a presentation at the end of it. They, of course, were writing about their own wars, and overtly war. But again, they said they felt free to write openly because they had heard us tell my father's story. And again, even though my husband and I are very careful to say that we are not veterans, we are the children of veterans with PTSD. So we also have trauma of our own from growing up with them, but we are not veterans. They appreciated that we were absolutely upfront. They appreciated that we always had a therapist or a counselor nearby in our sessions with them when we were writing, and we were writing with them. Every exercise that I introduced, we all did at the same time. And then we also participated in the presentation, which was primarily theirs. But they told us later on in the residency, as we got to know each other better, that they felt they could really open up and tell their own stories because my husband and I were also making ourselves vulnerable and telling our stories. And you can't do that if you're a therapist or a counselor. You have to maintain a certain professional distance. And as artists, we felt that we did not, especially, well, we would not have done that if we had not had, again, professionals who could deal with someone's breakdown better than we could if that happened. And it did happen a couple of times. But that, again, is another difference and another way in which the arts, I think, can help us help other people deal with their trauma. Because we are artists, because we go there, because we make ourselves vulnerable to our audiences or to the people who see our exhibits. We are sharing ourselves. So they felt, it's almost as if they felt we had earned the right to hear their story by sharing ours first. Does that make sense? And please forgive my hoarseness. It's still hot in Nashville, unseasonably so, and there is so much pollen, and I have every airborne allergy known to man, so please forgive me. But so what about that? What about us sharing ourselves and that allowing other people to share back in the teaching artist situation? Because that's what we do. We're teaching artists. We're artists who also work in educational settings. What kind of difference does it make? Anybody? You don't have to, but I'd love to hear. Okay. Any other questions or observations?
Sorry, I couldn't get the unmute off there.
Oh,
I'm like, go, where is it?
Well, you can ask Madeline.
I've got you now. No, I think the thing, if you open up and you say something, I think that's a thing in all, if you do it genuinely, then
Yes.
people can tell very quickly whether you're genuine or not.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's how most of the sort of self-help programs, you know, like 12-step programs and things work. They have something and then you share, and then other people, and it's like, oh, it's by you sharing your story, you have actually created a safe environment.
Yeah.
You can then hold the space for somebody else. You've created a safe place. Even though you're saying, it sounds weird, because even though, I mean, war is horrendous, and you've opened up about these horrors, it still created a safe place.
Yes, absolutely. A place where they could, in a way, even stand to relive them, but with people who would hold them safely as they did so, as they shared with each other. And also, again, excuse me, we all know this, by giving them the tools to create a work of art out of their experience, they are creating something, they are making something that is beautiful, even if it's horrible. They are able to shape that experience and not just have it shape them. So again, as artists, that is part of what we do. That's part of the spiritual part of what we do, in my opinion. I see some heads nodding. Other comments? And thank you very much. What else?
Hi. Hello.
Hello.
You were talking a little bit about the role of the therapist in your workshops, and I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to how much you fold them into the process, or how present are they? Are they participating in other ways, or are they, I guess, just speak more to their role in the workshop.
Thank you. Yes. It was therapists who first noticed that we really were providing a service for them. When we first started doing things for veterans, especially in veterans organizations, treatment organizations, like the Veterans Administration, hospitals and so forth, there would be therapists and counselors in the audience. And they would report to us later that just seeing this catalyst, this artistic catalyst for healing, would get their clients, their patients, a year down the road. It said we were hearing things we wouldn't have expected to hear, if ever, at least for months or maybe years in the future. So they were the first ones who said, you need to do this for this reason. Then when we get into the residency situation, we've only done a couple that were really long-term and where we were working with therapists. So the people we were working, and one was a larger group and one was just the three. they were also working individually or in other groups with the therapists and counselors who knew that we were working with them and who had seen my father's war more than once usually, and knew the kind of effect it could have. So, so in two ways, I guess. When it's just a one-off, when we just do a show for a group that is in healing in some way, then the therapists or counselors take what the audience, what the veterans and their families and so on take away from the show. They take that and then move ahead with it. And again, they say that it helps them, it helps their clients open, and again, open up those guarded places that they've been protecting and holding. We usually don't have therapists in the sessions, like the writing and then learning to present sessions with us, because it changes the dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
They become more aware that it's about therapy and less about art. And we're focused on the art. We're focused on helping the people create something again out of their horrible experiences, create something good and wonderful to share. But they're always close by. They're not eavesdropping, but they're right outside the door in the office right next to us. And we learned pretty quickly to recognize when something was going to happen that we couldn't handle. The other thing that's always been lovely, we've been very lucky so far, is that the people we're working with take care of each other. They can really spot when somebody else is about to lose it. And they take care of them and say, why don't you go talk to Judy? Or they, will give us an eyebrow wiggle, and we will, take a little break. Everybody go get a drink of water, and we take them to Judy. But so it's different kinds of partnerships, but we're all very much aware of each other, and we keep up with each other and what's going on. And the patients, the clients, they know that we're talking. Robert and I have to be absolutely transparent in a way that therapists and counselors not only aren't, but can't be. But we feel that we have to be. And it's a nice combination, I think. And the professionals seem to think that it works well. And again, gets people down the road faster. Did that address your question?
Yeah, thank you very much. Totally.
Any other part of it, or?
No. I you kind of totally explained exactly what I was wondering.
Okay.
About how to have them nearby.
Yes.
But also not impede or sort of change the creative process that you're working with.
I do think that's as important. And something just occurred to me. I think they trust us because, again, it's hard for me to say nice things about myself. We are really good artists, and we're telling a story that's really awful. And I'm a really good singer, and my husband's are really good, so that they see that we are really good at what we do. So they trust us to also see that we know they're really good at what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And also that the patients are really good at what they're doing. But there is a mutual respect. And I think, again, it starts with that performance. I know frequently the emphasis is not on performance of the artists who come in. And this was a surprise for us, that the emphasis was that the whole thing was going to start and work as well as it did, because it started with a really strong work of art. And I guess that, if anything, that's what I really learned. I've been a teaching artist since 1987. And that was the real eye-opener for me, was that using myself as an artist did belong in the teaching artist milieu. So, yay.
Yeah.
What, do I see questions over here or nope? Okay, people are leaving, which is fine. What time is it? Oh, we're good.
Yeah, so just to interject here,
Thank
we're
you,
sort of
Adam.
5 minutes from the end, so it might be a good time to, if there's anything that you were desperate to say and haven't, or if there's any questions that anyone has been thinking of and not voiced yet, this might be the time to start getting some of those unpicked, and then we'll wrap up in about 5-10 minutes.
Anyone? I've been talking a lot.
Okay, I'll
Yes.
talk again. Thank you. I just left a comment in the chat box. While I was hearing about the work you do with your husband, I was remembering a graphic novel called The Silent Wars. It's by Jaime Martin. He's an Spanish artist, an illustrator, a comic writer, and I believe what he does is fiction, but what his graphic novel, the main character is a comic writer, and this comic writer has a writing block, and he has this idea about writing about his father's time when he did service for his country. It's all in Spain, and his father did his military service in the time of Franco's, how do you say that? When Franco had the power in Spain, and how it was, he's very honest in the way that he tells the story about this fictional father, because he says the beautiful, the ugly, the absurd, everything in one whole story. So I also wanted to recommend it. I left the URL, the link, so you guys could check it out. You guys and girls could check it out. Unfortunately, I believe it's only in Spanish and Catalan. But if you are able to read it, I think you would like it a lot, every one of you, especially Carol, I hope.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And yeah, be sure Madeline, be sure we get that. I'm not sure how to get it off the chat.
I'll email it round after the session, and I'll also try and remember to put it in the link when we upload the video to YouTube, so that when people listen back, they can see the link too.
Oh, thank you.
I think really the last thing I might like to say is that we cannot overestimate how important our work is these days. It probably always has been, but by our, I mean all of our work as artists and as teaching artists. And I think this exploration into trauma has always been there. I mean, the Greeks talked about catharsis. You know, it's the same thing. When people see My Father's War, they have a catharsis, and then their world opens up, their hearts open up. But the more we can be aware of the effect that we can have, and it can be with comedy or with a mixture of comedy and drama. It doesn't have to be, and there's a lot of funny stuff in Dad's story, actually. We do make people laugh. If we only made them cry, they wouldn't make it through the end of the show, you know. But it's, thank you guys for being here today, because it's traumatic times and we are needed. And I'm glad you all are here. Thank you.
Maybe last thing. Hello.
Yes, yes.
Do you have a link where on a YouTube where we can watch it, maybe part of your performance?
Yes, and Madeline, can you post those with also with the link? myfatherswar.org is our website. It is out of date and does not have the current videos on it because we are really bad at marketing and that kind of stuff. You can also email me at ponderanew, PONDERANEW @AOL.com, or you can reach us at myfatherswar.org. There's also a contact sheet there.
After this session, I will just link everyone together in an email.
Great.
And then you can use it or not, or pick and choose. But also, a couple of days ago, Carol sent me some things to pass on to everyone. So there were some documents, but then in the body of the text, there were a couple of links, and those will take you to a couple of videos about some of the performances. So I'll post them again in this email because I know how it is, things go. But they should be there for you to have a look at.
And there was some, I can send you other stuff as well. Are we met? Oh, we've got 2 minutes. I'm sorry. I usually go way over.
It was expertly timed. Thank you. I think if there aren't any other comments, then we'll probably wrap up here. That feels like kind of a natural point to switch over to an email chain with all of the links and the documents. If anything else springs to people's mind in the next 60 seconds that you want to share a link to, do put it in the chat. Otherwise, you can email it to everyone afterwards. But thank you so much, everyone, for coming and for joining in. I'm really pleased we had a bit of an international bunch this evening, and I know it's not the middle of the day for all of us, so thank you for coming. Carol, thank you so much. I mean, we were in New York last year, but I'm so pleased that you were able to do this session with everything you've got going on, so thank you.
Oh, blessings.
Thank you, everyone, for taking part. These happen every month. If you aren't subscribed, make sure you do. Next time, we're talking about teaching artists and artists who teach, and an exchange of pedagogies out of Australia and Tasmania. So again, a very strange time zone scenario, but yeah, keep in touch, do email, and keep an eye on your inboxes for the next one, and spread the word and everything like that. So I think we'll wrap up here, but thank you so much, everyone, for joining.